On a Tuesday morning in February of 1987, Interstate 90 near the Montana-Idaho border became a parking lot. The temperature was 41 degrees below zero, the kind of cold that turns breath to ice crystals before they hit the ground, the kind of cold that makes steel brittle and rubber shatter and diesel fuel gel into wax. At 4:47 a.m., a Freightliner semi hauling lumber hit a patch of black ice halfway up 4th of July Pass and jackknifed across both lanes. The trailer swung wide, caught the guardrail, and folded like an accordion. The tractor ended up pointing west. The trailer pointed east, and 63 feet of crushed aluminum and splintered lumber blocked every inch of usable highway. By 7:00 a.m., traffic was backed up 14 miles in both directions. The Montana State Highway Department sent engineers. They sent supervisors. They sent 2 modern hydraulic wreckers, $400,000 machines with heated cabs, computer-controlled stabilization systems, and enough lifting capacity to move mountains. By 9:00 a.m., both wreckers were sitting idle with their engines off. Nothing can function below -30, the lead engineer said. His name was Derek Strand, and he'd been with the Highway Department for 9 years. He stood beside one of the disabled wreckers, watching hydraulic fluid drip from a cracked hose and freeze before it hit the ground. Hydraulics are too thick. Seals are brittle. We're not risking equipment or personnel in these conditions. We wait for temperatures to rise. How long? Asked one of the truck drivers who'd been stuck in the backup for 3 hours. Weather Service says maybe 2 days before we see zero. 2 days. That's the situation. The driver walked back to his truck, where his engine was idling to keep the cab warm and burning diesel at a gallon an hour. That's when the Diamond T showed up. Let me tell you about Raymond Hutchins, because you need to understand the man before you understand what he did. Ray was 76 years old in 1987. He'd been pulling vehicles out of Montana winters since 1949, back when the interstate system didn't exist, and Highway 10 was a 2-lane road that closed every time it snowed. He'd come to Montana after the war, served in the 3rd Armored Division under Patton, worked as a tank retrieval specialist in North Africa and France, learned how to move 30-ton vehicles across sand and mud and ice using nothing but cables and patience and an understanding of leverage that most engineers never acquire. After the war, Ray bought a ranch outside Missoula and a 1952 Diamond T201 wrecker from a mining company that was shutting down, paid $1,200 cash. The Diamond T had been built for heavy mining equipment recovery, tough, simple, designed to work in conditions that would kill lesser machines. Ray had been using that same truck for 35 years. He'd modified it over the decades, added a secondary fuel tank with a diesel heater to prevent gelling, wrapped every fuel line in heat tape and canvas insulation, installed an extra battery and a block heater that ran off a wood fire when temperatures dropped below -20, learned cold start procedures from mushers running the Iditarod and uranium prospectors working winter claims in the Brooks Range. By 1987, the Diamond T was more Ray's creation than Diamond T's, a machine shaped by thousands of Montana winters and a man who understood that cold wasn't an enemy, it was just a condition that required preparation. Ray heard about the jackknife on his CB radio, heard the engineers discussing equipment limitations and weather delays, heard them decide to wait. He put on his parka, started the Diamond T. It fired on the first try, like always, and drove to 4th of July Pass. The highway crew heard him coming before they saw him. The Diamond T's engine had a distinctive sound, a deep, mechanical rumble that modern diesels don't make anymore. Then they saw the truck itself, a boxy, old-fashioned wrecker with a traditional boom and dual rear wheels, painted dark red with HUTCHINS recovery in faded white letters on the door. Derek Strand walked over as Ray climbed down from the cab. Ray moved slowly. 76-year-old joints in 40 below cold don't move fast, but deliberately. Roads closed, Derek said. not hostile, just stating facts. We're not operating until temperatures rise above -30. I heard, Ray said. His voice was quiet, weathered by decades of Montana wind. Thought I might be able to help. Derek looked at the Diamond T, looked at Ray, looked back at the Diamond T. With that, she's pulled heavier, Ray said. Derek didn't laugh. He was too professional, but his expression said everything his mouth didn't. Sir, that truck's got to be 35 years old. 35 years of Montana, Ray said. She knows the cold. Our modern wreckers are down, hydraulics won't function, hoses are cracking, and you think a 1952 truck is going to work when $400,000 worth of new equipment won't. Your equipment's designed to protect itself, Ray said calmly. Sensors shut it down when conditions get hard. Hydraulics freeze because they're complex. My truck doesn't have sensors, doesn't have hydraulics, just cables and gears and an engine that runs if you treat it right. One of the other engineers, a younger man named Kyle, walked up. You're serious? You think you can move that semi with a wrecker from the Eisenhower administration? I think modern equipment quits when it's supposed to keep working, Ray said. Old equipment works until you tell it to stop. Derek sighed. He looked at the jackknifed semi, looked at the 14 miles of backed-up traffic, looked at his crew standing around with nothing to do. You touch that semi and something goes wrong, state's not liable. Understood, Ray said. And if your truck breaks down, we're not towing it. Won't need towing. Derek stepped aside. Show me. Ray walked back to the Diamond T. The highway crew watched. A few pulled out phones. This was either going to be a rescue or a disaster. Let me tell you about the 1952 Diamond T-201, because understanding the machine is the only way to understand what happened next. The Diamond T-201 was built in Chicago in 1952 for heavy industrial recovery work. It had an inline-six gasoline engine that produced about 100 horsepower, nothing impressive by modern standards, but the power wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the drivetrain. The 201 had a 4-speed transmission with a granny-low first gear that moved the truck at walking speed but generated enormous torque. The rear axle had a 7:1 reduction ratio. The winch was mechanically driven off the power takeoff, with a 3-stage planetary gear reduction that multiplied pulling force by a factor of 12. Put it all together, and the Diamond T could generate 25,000 pounds of pulling force at the cable drum. Not as much as a modern hydraulic wrecker, but delivered smoothly, consistently. Without computer intervention or hydraulic pressure. Most importantly, it had no systems that could freeze. No hydraulic hoses, no electronic controls, no plastic seals or rubber O-rings, just steel cable, cast iron gears, and mechanical clutches that worked as well at 40 below as they did at 40 above. Ray had learned something during the war that most modern operators had forgotten. Reliability beats capability when conditions turn bad. He positioned the Diamond T about 80 feet from the jackknifed semi on a slight uphill grade where the pavement was solid. He climbed out, walked slowly around the accident, studying angles. The semi was heavy, probably 65,000 pounds loaded. The trailer was wedged against the guardrail, creating enormous resistance. The temperature was still dropping, now -43. Ray walked back to the Diamond T and began his setup. First, he set the parking brake and put wooden blocks behind the rear wheels, not for safety, but for stability. Then he engaged the front-wheel lockout hubs manually, giving the truck 4-wheel drive for maximum traction. Next, he pulled out his rigging. Not modern synthetic rope or hydraulic cables, but old-school 3/4-inch steel cable with hand-spliced eyes and heavy shackles. The kind of cable that had pulled Sherman tanks out of French mud in 1944. He walked the cable across the ice to the jackknifed semi, moving carefully, testing each step. When he reached the trailer, he studied the frame for several minutes, looking for the right attachment point. The highway crew watched in silence now, no jokes, no commentary. Ray found what he was looking for, a frame crossmember that would distribute the pulling force without concentrating stress. He connected the cable with 2 shackles, tightened them with a 4-foot cheetah bar he'd carried from the truck, and tested the connection with his weight. Solid. He walked back to the Diamond T, breathing slowly through his nose to avoid freezing his lungs, and climbed into the cab. Derek Strand stood with his arms crossed. Kyle stood beside him, holding a radio. Ray started the winch. The sound was different from a modern hydraulic system. Slower, deeper, a rhythmic mechanical clanking as the planetary gears engaged and the cable drum began to turn. The cable went taut. For 30 seconds, nothing visible happened. The Diamond T sat there, engine idling, winch turning, cable tight. The jackknifed semi didn't move. Then Ray shifted the transmission into first gear and released the clutch. The Diamond T began to pull. Not fast, walking speed. The engine note didn't change. The truck didn't strain. It just moved forward slowly, steadily, the winch multiplying the pulling force through 12-to-1 gearing. The cable stretched slightly, not breaking, just settling under load. And the semi moved. 1 inch, then 2. Kyle took a step forward. It's moving. The trailer began to rotate. Slowly, the crumpled aluminum scraped against the guardrail with a metallic shriek that echoed across the frozen landscape. The tractor's front wheels, locked in position for 3 hours, broke free from the ice that had formed around them. 3 inches, 6 inches. Ray kept the throttle steady. The Diamond T kept pulling. The mechanical winch kept turning. 1 foot, 2 feet. The semi was rotating now, the trailer coming away from the guardrail, the whole rig beginning to straighten. Derek Strand's mouth was open. He closed it, opened it again, said nothing. 5 feet, 10 feet. The semi was nearly parallel to the highway now. The trailer had cleared the guardrail. The tractor was pointed the right direction. Ray stopped the truck, set the brake, and climbed down. He walked to the semi, studied the new position, nodded once, and walked back to the Diamond T. He shifted into reverse, backed up 20 feet, and made a second pull from a different angle. This time the semi moved easier. The trailer straightened completely. The whole rig was now sitting parallel to the highway, off the travel lanes, positioned so a conventional tow truck could hook up and haul it away. Ray shut down the winch, released the cable, and began coiling it up. The highway crew erupted. Not with cheers, these were professional men who'd seen plenty of recoveries, but with the kind of quiet, serious acknowledgement that comes when witnessing something that shouldn't have been possible. Derek walked over as Ray was securing the cable on the Diamond T's boom. "How," Derek said, "our wreckers, modern equipment, computer controls, hydraulic power, they couldn't function. That truck's from 1952, and it worked like the cold didn't even exist." "The cold exists," Ray said quietly, still working, "but it only stops equipment that's designed to protect itself. Hydraulics freeze because they use fluid. Electronics fail because they're temperature sensitive. Computers shut down because they're programmed with safety limits." He patted the Diamond T's fender. "This truck doesn't protect itself. It just works. No hydraulics to freeze, no computers to override the operator, just mechanical advantage and an engine that runs if you prepare it right." "How do you prepare for 40 below?" "Same way I prepared for tank recovery in France in 1944. Preheat the engine, keep the fuel system warm, don't rush the start, and understand that machinery doesn't care about temperature, it cares about whether the operator knows what he's doing." Derek looked at the ground. When he looked back up, something had changed in his expression. "I spent 9 years believing that newer was better. More technology, more capability, more power." "Newer is better for most things," Ray said. "Better fuel economy, better comfort, better efficiency, but there are some conditions where simple beats complex, where old-school reliability beats modern sophistication." He climbed into the Diamond T. Your wreckers will work fine when it warms up. They're good machines. They're just not built for this. What do we owe you? Nothing, Ray said, just doing what the truck was built for. There's got to be something. Ray thought for a moment. Montana Highway Historical Society. They're trying to restore a 1940s rotary snowplow. Donate whatever you think is fair. Derek pulled out his phone, and within 15 minutes had authorized a $10,000 donation. Ray nodded, started the Diamond T, and began driving back toward Missoula. As the red truck disappeared down the now-clearing highway, Kyle turned to Derek. Did that just happen? Did a 76-year-old man with a truck from 1952 just do what $500,000 of our equipment couldn't do? Yes, Derek said quietly, that just happened. But the story doesn't end there. Let me tell you about what happened 3 weeks later, because that's when Ray made the discovery. The Diamond T had been running rough since the 4th of July pass recovery. Nothing major. Just a slight miss in the engine, a hesitation when accelerating. Ray suspected a carburetor issue. Maybe ice had formed during the extreme cold operation and damaged something. He pulled the truck into his shop, a pole barn on his ranch outside Missoula, and began troubleshooting. After checking the obvious things, he decided to pull the carburetor completely and rebuild it. That meant disconnecting the fuel line, which ran along the truck's frame rail from the tank to the engine. When he removed the fuel line bracket from the frame, something fell out. A small rust-colored metal object, about the size of a quarter, that had been wedged between the frame rail and the bracket. Ray picked it up, brushed off the rust, and realized what he was holding. A military identification tag. He looked closer at the frame rail. There was a small access hole about 2 inches across that was normally covered by the fuel line bracket. Ray grabbed a flashlight and looked inside. The frame rail was hollow, standard construction for that era, but there was something inside it, something that rattled when he shook the frame. Ray spent the next hour carefully cutting an access panel in the frame rail. When he finally peeled back the metal, he found a sealed military ammunition canister, about 12 inches long and 6 inches wide, wedged inside the hollow frame. The canister was labeled U.S. Army 3 RD AIMOID Division, 1943. Ray's hands were shaking as he opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed in wax paper, a Purple Heart medal in its presentation case. The name on the citation, Corporal James R. Morrison, 3rd Armored Division, wounded in action near Kasserine Pass, Tunisia, February 1943. 12 handwritten letters on U.S. Army stationery, dated between January and March 1943, addressed to Morrison from various soldiers in his unit. The letters talked about home, about fear, about hope. 3 topographic maps of North Africa marked with coordinates and annotations in pencil. At the bottom of one map, Supply Depot, abandoned March 1943, equipment left in place. And $4,200 in U.S. currency, mostly 20s and 50s, dated 1942. There was also a handwritten note, dated April 1943. To whoever finds this, my name is James Morrison. I was wounded at Kasserine Pass and shipped home before my unit moved north. The coordinates on the map mark a supply depot we established but never retrieved. Equipment, ammunition, spare parts, all left behind when we moved out fast. The Army doesn't know about it, probably never will. The money is my combat pay and poker winnings. I'm putting this in the frame of my recovery truck because I might not make it home, and if someone finds this someday, maybe they can put it to use. The depot coordinates are real, so is the Purple Heart, so is everything my brothers wrote in those letters. Don't let them be forgotten. CPL J.R. Morrison, April 12, 1943. Ray sat in his shop, holding letters written by men who'd been dead for 40 years, and understood something he hadn't known before. The Diamond T-201 hadn't been built in 1952. The frame, the running gear, the basic structure, they'd been salvaged from an earlier military recovery vehicle, a truck that James Morrison had driven in North Africa in 1943 before being wounded and sent home. Morrison had hidden his most precious possessions in the frame of his truck, and when Diamond T built the 201 in 1952, they'd used surplus military components, including Morrison's frame rails. The hidden canister had traveled from Tunisia to Chicago to Montana, waiting 44 years to be found. Let me tell you what Ray did with that discovery. He contacted the U.S. Army's Historical Division. They confirmed that Corporal James Morrison had been wounded at Kasserine Pass, evacuated to the States, and died in 1968 in Arizona. He had no living relatives. The coordinates on the map were real. The Army sent a survey team to North Africa and found the abandoned supply depot exactly where Morrison had marked it. Most of the equipment was gone, scavenged over decades, but some remained, and the site was documented for historical purposes. The letters Ray donated to the National WWII Museum in New Orleans. They became part of an exhibit on tank warfare in North Africa. The Purple Heart he gave to the 3rd Armored Division Memorial at Fort Knox, where Morrison's name was added to the honor roll. The money, Ray kept it, but not for himself. He used it to establish a scholarship fund for children of military veterans studying mechanical engineering at the University of Montana. He named it the James R. Morrison Memorial Scholarship. Morrison saved his most important things in the frame of his truck, Ray told the university administrator. Figured his memory should be saved the same way inside something that keeps working. The Diamond T stayed in Ray's shop. He drove it for another 12 years, until 1999, when he was 88, and his doctor finally convinced him to retire. "You're going to kill yourself out there," the doctor said. "Truck still runs," Ray said. "That's not the point." Ray looked at the Diamond T, sitting in the shop where it had sat since 1952. Dark red paint, white lettering, boom that had pulled everything from combines to semi-trucks out of Montana winters. "All right," he said, "but the truck doesn't get scrapped." The Montana Historical Society took it. They restored it carefully, keeping Ray's modifications intact: the heated fuel tank, the insulated lines, the extra battery, all the cold weather adaptations that had kept it running at 40 below. They built a display around it, with photographs of Ray, documentation of the 4th of July Pass recovery, and the story of James Morrison's hidden canister. The plaque reads, 1952, Diamond T201 Wrecker. Operator, Raymond Hutchins, 1950-21999. This truck worked in Montana winters for 47 years and never failed in the cold. Its frame carried a soldier's legacy from North Africa to Montana, hidden for 44 years until found by the man who understood both machines and honor. Raymond Hutchins died in 2003 at the age of 92. His funeral was held at the First Methodist Church in Missoula, and the parking lot was full. Derek Strand came. So did Kyle. So did 37 other Highway Department employees who'd been at 4th of July Pass that day in 1987. The eulogy was given by Ray's son, Michael, who talked about growing up with a father who believed machines were like people. They needed respect, patience, and understanding. "My dad never believed in impossible," Michael said. "He believed in preparation. He believed that a good machine, properly maintained, would outlast the fashion that tried to replace it. And he believed that some knowledge, the kind learned in war and passed down through work, was more valuable than any technology." After the funeral, Derek Strand stood outside the church with Kyle. "I think about that day sometimes," Kyle said. 4th of July Pass, 41 below, watching a 76-year-old man do what our modern equipment couldn't do. "I think about it every time equipment fails," Derek said. "Every time a computer says something's impossible. Every time I hear someone say we need to wait for better conditions. He was quiet for a moment. Ray Hutchins taught me that machines don't have limits, operators have limits, and the best operators are the ones who learned before limits became excuses. The 1952 Diamond T201 still sits in the Montana Historical Society. Next to it is Morrison's Purple Heart, the letters from Tunisia, and a photograph of Ray taken at 4th of July Pass in 1987, standing beside the truck, with frost in his mustache and absolute certainty in his eyes. Every February, on the anniversary of the 4th of July Pass recovery, someone from the Montana Highway Department drives to the museum and leaves a diamond-shaped piece of metal on the truck's running board. A reminder that some machines don't quit when the temperature drops, they just wait for someone who knows how to start them. And some men don't retire when the world says they're too old. They just keep pulling until the weather breaks and the job is done. The engineers said nothing could function below -30. The old man fired up his 1952 Diamond T and proved that nothing is just a word people use when they've run out of knowledge.